could give your younger self some advice, what would you give the 21-year-old Ozzy? What advice would you give you?
Don't do drugs.
There's a video that's been circulating online lately, a rare and deeply personal conversation between Ozzy Osbourne and his son, Jack Osbourne. In it, we see a softer, wiser side of the rock legend, the man behind the chaos, the fame, and the music. Jack asks his dad, if you could give your younger self some advice, what would it be? Ozzy doesn't hesitate. His answer is simple, almost painful: don't do drugs. A few laughs follow when he jokes about his 30-year-old self, saying he'd probably tell that version to take more drugs. But beneath the humor, there's a quiet truth.
What about a 30-year-old Ozzy? What advice would you give him?
Take more drugs. I did what I did when I was 21, and I did what I did when I was 30. But now, I feel better today than I've done in a long time. I'm 66 this December.
What's the secret? How are you still rocking and rolling as hard as you are?
I honestly, I work out, I exercise a lot. I go for regular physicals, call me a hypochondriac, I don't care.
Ozzy's lived a life of extremes, and now as he reflects on it all, his words carry the weight of survival. At 66, he says he feels better than he has in years. No drugs, no booze, no cigarettes. He works out, gets regular checkups, and calls himself a bit of a hypochondriac, but proudly. Because as he says, that's probably why he's still here. There's no dark magic or hex from Satan, just the simple power of choosing to stay alive and be clear-headed. After decades of chaos, he's finally okay with being okay. When asked if he ever feared going solo after leaving Black Sabbath, Ozzy admits that the early days were the best, when there was nothing to lose and everything to prove.
I don't smoke anymore, I don't do drugs anymore, I don't drink booze anymore.
When you left Sabbath and you went on to go and do your own solo career, and release Blizzard of Oz, were you scared that people A, weren't going to like it, and B, you couldn't do it by yourself?
But I've said this before, the earliest days of any band thing I've ever been in are the best because you've got everything to gain, nothing to lose, and you've got time to make a good album.
Yeah.
That hunger, he says, is what made the music real. And to anyone chasing a dream, his advice is pure and timeless. Write as much as you can, because once life gets busy, you never have enough time to create. And when Jack asks if he ever regretted being a musician, Ozzy smiles. Not at all, he says. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. It's a simple moment, but one that now feels heavier, almost prophetic. Behind the laughter and the raw honesty, you can feel a man at peace with his past, proud of what he's overcome, and grateful just to still be here. There's something hauntingly beautiful about hearing Ozzy Osbourne talk about his life, not as the Prince of Darkness, but as a man looking back at the road that made him. In this rare conversation with his son Jack, Ozzy opens up about how it all began. He says when he was young, he never imagined he'd become a rock legend. Maybe a fireman, maybe a bricklayer. That was the kind of life he pictured. But then he heard the Beatles, and in that moment, everything changed. He didn't just want to be a musician, he wanted to be a Beatle. That dream, that spark, set everything in motion. Then came Black Sabbath. What started as a group of working-class kids from rainy Birmingham turned into something the world had never seen before. Ozzy says, "You gotta remember, that was 45 years ago. Even after all those decades, they had just wrapped up a sold-out world tour, their first ever #1 album in America and 12 other countries." He pauses, smiles, and says simply, "It was, wow." When Jack asks about new music, Ozzy surprises him. He says he likes Bruno Mars, Snow Patrol, and a few others, but admits that when he listens too much, the melodies sneak into his own writing. These days, he says, it feels like everything is just old ideas recycled. Not bad, just different. By the 80s, it exploded, and now, he says, the computer age has changed everything. You can fake a jam. You can even program one. The art of being in a real band, he says, is slowly dying. Still, Ozzy's proud of the legacy Sabbath left behind. Young artists tell him, if it wasn't for Sabbath, we wouldn't be here. And while he laughs at some of the comparisons, he knows what they mean. For him, heavy metal was never about noise, it was about rebellion. It came from pain, from growing up in a world that wasn't bright or beautiful. In his words, we came from Birmingham, pollution, rain, misery. Everyone was singing about love and flowers, and we said, screw that. That's how the dark, heavy sound of Sabbath was born. And when asked what metal truly is, Ozzy doesn't hesitate. It's not just riffs or volume, it's an attitude. It's about breaking rules, about refusing to be told what to do. He laughs, saying, if you want me to do something, tell me not to. That's Ozzy, the rebel, the survivor, and above all, the entertainer. Because for him, it's always been simple. My only goal is to get on that stage and give the audience a great day out. It's rare to hear a rock icon reflect like this, raw, wise, and humble. Behind the madness and fame, there's just Ozzy, the kid from Birmingham who heard the Beatles one day and decided to change the world. In another moment from the same conversation, Ozzy opens up about what truly drives him. He says, "When I hit the stage, I want to give them my heart on a plate, and that's God's truth." And you can feel he means it. For all the chaos, the scandals, the wild stories that followed him for decades, that's what it's always been about, giving everything he has to the people who showed up to see him. When Jack asks if he realizes how rare his success is, how few musicians ever become even bigger after leaving a legendary band, Ozzy just shrugs. He says he never sat in the studio and thought, "You know what? I'm going to make a bad album this time." Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, but he always gave his best. And behind that confidence is also self-doubt. He admits he's his own worst critic. Spending months in the studio can wear you down. You start to lose perspective. That's why he liked to finish an album, then walk away for a few weeks to clear his head before hearing it again. Only then could he listen with fresh ears like a fan instead of a perfectionist. And then, almost like a confession, Ozzy says something that catches Jack off guard. "I don't play any instruments, I don't understand music, but I can write melodies." Jack laughs and reminds him that he's seen his dad play guitar before. Real chords, real songs, but Ozzy just smiles and denies it, insisting he can't. It's a small exchange, but a powerful one. After decades of fame, after millions of records sold, Ozzy still doesn't see himself as a musician. He sees himself as a feeling, a man who turns emotion into sound. As they talk about his new compilation album, Memoirs of a Madman, Jack asks if it's strange to look back at everything he's done, all the songs, the tours, the madness. Ozzy pauses, almost in disbelief, and says, "Yeah, it's kind of crazy." And it is. From a poor kid in Birmingham who once dreamed of being a Beatle to one of the most iconic figures in rock history, Ozzy's journey feels larger than life, yet somehow, in moments like this, deeply human. When you listen closely, this isn't just a conversation between father and son. It's a legacy being passed on, from one generation to the next. A reminder that even legends doubt themselves, even icons get tired, but the ones who endure are those who keep giving their heart away, every time they step on stage. It's strange how life can change in an instant. For Ozzy Osbourne, it all began with one phone call, one moment that changed everything. He remembers it vividly. He was sitting in a club when his manager walked up and said, "You got something to tell you? Your album's entering the charts at number 17 next week." Ozzy thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. Their debut Black Sabbath album was climbing the charts, and for the first time, he heard their song Evil Woman playing on the radio at 6 in the morning. "We're on the radio," he thought. That was it, the beginning of everything. At the time, Ozzy figured it would all last maybe a few years. A quick ride, a bit of fun, some booze with his mates, and then back to real life. But from that moment on, everything changed. His life took off in ways he could never have imagined. The fame, the chaos, the heartbreak, it all came at once. He was married, then divorced, and then he met Sharon. He says you couldn't have written his life story if you tried. Every twist, every fall, every comeback, it's all been beyond anything he could have planned. "This is it," he said. "This is my life." And then out of nowhere it turns again, completely out of context. But that's life. He laughs when Jack brings up his driver's license. How in America they drive on the wrong side of the road. Ozzy admits he still has a license, but proudly adds he's got no points, because he never drives. Beneath the laughter though, Jack asks a question every fan wants to know: does he have regrets? Ozzy doesn't hesitate. "Life's full of regrets," he says. "You regret doing this, you regret doing that, but you either get over it, or you don't." And then comes one of the most revealing moments, a question about politics. Jack points out that while Ozzy's songs often touch on deep, sometimes political themes, at home, he never talked about politics. Ozzy just laughs. "They should all start playing music," he says. Then he tells a story about meeting former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, right when the Iraq War was starting. Ozzy thought Blair was going to ask him to record a song for the troops, something meaningful. Instead, Blair came up and said, "Did you know I was once in a band? But I couldn't quite get the chords to Iron Man." That's classic Ozzy, blunt, funny, and real. A man who's seen everything, from the darkest places to the brightest lights, yet still sees the world with humor and humility. From a working-class kid in Birmingham who just wanted to be a Beatle, to one of the most influential rock icons of all time, Ozzy's story isn't just about fame or music. It's about survival. It's about giving everything he had, night after night, until there was nothing left to give. And in his own words, "When I hit the stage, I want to give them my heart on a plate. That's God's truth." Now, as fans revisit these moments, these conversations between father and son, it feels like something more than just an interview. It feels like a farewell, not in sadness, but in gratitude. A man looking back at the madness, the music, and the miracle of still being here. Ozzy Osbourne, the man who never followed the rules, but somehow always found his way home. He was never supposed to be a rock legend. Ozzy Osbourne was just a poor kid from Birmingham who thought he'd end up a fireman, maybe a bricklayer, until one day he heard the Beatles. That moment changed everything. He didn't just want to be in a band, he wanted to be a Beatle. And when Black Sabbath was born, the world had no idea what was coming. Ozzy still remembers the moment it all began. Sitting in a club when his manager walked up and said, "Your album's entering the charts at number 17 next week." Ozzy couldn't believe it. Just days earlier, he'd heard their song Evil Woman on the radio for the first time at 6 in the morning. He thought it'd be fun for a couple of years, some drinks with his mates, a wild ride, and then back to normal life. But from that day on, everything changed. He laughs now, saying he thought it'd all be temporary, but fame has a way of rewriting destiny. He went from a kid in a polluted industrial town to a man who helped shape an entire genre of music. He says, "You couldn't write my life story. It's been unbelievable." When his son Jack asks about regrets, Ozzy doesn't hesitate. "Life's full of regrets," he says, "but you either get over it or you don't." And when Jack mentions how political some of his lyrics are, Ozzy just shrugs. "They should all start playing music instead," he laughs. Then he recalls meeting British Prime Minister Tony Blair during the Iraq War. Ozzy expected Blair to talk about peace, or maybe ask him to record a song for the troops. Instead, Blair said, "Did you know I was once in a band, but I couldn't get the chords to Iron Man?" Ozzy couldn't believe it. Is that all you've got to say? That's the kind of honesty people love him for. No filter, no fake answers. He's seen war, loss, and chaos, yet he never pretends to have all the answers. When Jack asks if he's religious, Ozzy pauses. "I believe in a higher power," he says. "Call it God if you like, but I don't believe it's some guy in the clouds with wings." And he's never been afraid to call out hypocrisy. He remembers attending Ronnie James Dio's funeral and seeing protesters shouting hate. "The guy's gone," he said, "and you're standing there yelling Jesus could have saved you. You've got nothing better to do." Ozzy shakes his head. Freedom of speech is one thing, but there's always someone ready to tear down a good idea. Always. Through it all, one thing never changed: his purpose. "When I hit the stage," Ozzy says, "I want to give them my heart on a plate. That's God's truth." And that's exactly what he did for over 5 decades. Every show, every album, every scream into the microphone. He admits he never understood music theory, couldn't read notes, couldn't play instruments properly, but he could feel melodies. He could create emotion out of chaos. Even when others saw him as a madman, Ozzy was chasing something pure: connection. Now, as fans revisit this emotional conversation between father and son, it feels heavier. It feels like more than just an interview. It feels like closure. The kind of quiet, honest reflection that only comes from a man who's lived every dream, every nightmare, and still finds something to smile about. From the noise of Birmingham to the roar of the world's biggest stages, Ozzy Osbourne has lived 1,000 lives, and through it all, he's never stopped being himself. The rebel, the survivor, the man who gave his heart away every time he sang, because in the end, Ozzy never just played rock and roll, he was rock and roll. In one of his final recorded conversations with his son Jack, Ozzy Osbourne opened up in a way fans had rarely seen before: vulnerable, honest, and painfully human. He spoke about the chaos of his early career, how alcohol and drugs once controlled his every move, and how close he came to losing himself completely. Ozzy recalled meeting the legendary guitarist Randy Rhoads, a moment that changed his life forever. He laughed, remembering how he was half asleep, eating pizza, and didn't even want to meet another guitar player. But then this little blonde guy walked in, and the second he started playing, Ozzy knew something magical had just happened. Even in his drunken haze, he could tell this was one of the greatest musicians he'd ever met. When Randy died, Ozzy said it broke something inside him, and he truly believed that if Rhoads had lived longer, he would have been one of the greatest of all time. He also talked about finding Zakk Wylde, how out of thousands of demo tapes, he randomly picked one up, looked at the photo, and somehow just knew. It was fate, he said. That one tape changed everything. But behind the laughter and the memories was a man who'd seen both heaven and hell. Ozzy admitted that during the No More Tours era, he wasn't just tired, he was lost. He said he didn't want to die on stage, but once he stopped performing, he realized he had no reason to wake up in the morning. The boredom, the emptiness, it terrified him. Jack reminded him how he tried to fill that void with hobbies, dirt bikes, air rifles, dogs, anything to distract himself. Ozzy chuckled, calling himself a man with a concentration span smaller than a fly. But then his tone softened. "Music saved my life," he said quietly. "If it wasn't for music, I would have probably killed myself." He reflected on his journey from the rough streets of Birmingham to the hills of Beverly Hills, and even he couldn't believe how far he'd come. From Lud's Road to Beverly Hills, he said with a smile, I had no idea this life was even possible. When the reality show The Osbournes hit television, Ozzy's life changed once again, but this time, not because of music. He said that in the beginning, the show was fun. It was new, exciting, even funny at times, but as the cameras rolled on, the cracks began to show. The pressure of being watched all the time started to tear at the family. Ozzy admitted that he couldn't even walk down the street without being surrounded. You couldn't go anywhere, he said. It was madness. He spoke about fame with the kind of honesty most celebrities avoid. If too many people recognized him on the street, it annoyed him. But if no one did, that also made him angry. It's my ego, he said with a laugh, aware of the contradiction. He confessed that fame is a double-edged sword. It gives you everything, but quietly takes away your peace. What really got to him, though, were moments when people forgot he was human. If I'm in a hurry, or going to see someone in the hospital, people don't care. They just want a photo. The one thing that truly bothered him was when fans interrupted his meals. That's my time, he said. Your mom always tells me, the day people stop asking for your autograph is the day you should start worrying. He admitted she was probably right. Then he laughed again, talking about how every interview seemed to start the same way, with the old stories about biting the bat's head off or urinating on the Alamo. It doesn't make me mad, he said, but sometimes I just want to say, is that all you've got to ask me? What do bats taste like? Really? For a man who'd lived such an extraordinary life, he was tired of being reduced to a headline. Every now and then, he said softly, someone surprises me with a good question, and that's when I remember why I still love doing this. And in that moment, between the laughter, the regret, and the honesty, you could hear the voice of a man who had lived through everything. The fame, the addiction, the loss, the love. And somehow through it all, Ozzy Osbourne never stopped being exactly who he was, the Prince of Darkness, with a heart that never stopped beating to the rhythm of rock and roll.